The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Violet Jenkins trudged down the dusty main street of Granite, Colorado, her once fine dress clinging to her fuller figure, a testament to months of hardship that had changed her body but not broken her spirit. It was 1875, and the mining town had seen better days, but not Violet, who at 20 years old had only known the cruel indifference of a world that judged her worth by the inches of her waistline rather than the strength of her character. "There she goes again," whispered Mrs. Yates from the general store porch, not bothering to lower her voice. Poor Mr. Jenkins, God rest his soul, would roll in his grave seeing what's become of his daughter. Violet kept her eyes fixed on the boardwalk ahead, pretending not to hear. Her father had been dead 6 months, consumption claiming him after a brutal winter, leaving her with nothing but debts and a dilapidated homestead on the edge of town. The weight she'd gained during her grieving was just one more thing for the townsfolk to gossip about, as if her body were public property to assess and criticize. She passed the Golden Nugget Saloon, where raucous laughter spilled out onto the street along with the tinny sounds of a piano badly in need of tuning. The swinging doors burst open, and her step-uncle Martin staggered out, his ruddy face breaking into a malicious grin when he spotted her. "If it ain't my dear niece," he slurred, blocking her path. "Been wonderin' where you've been hidden that substantial self of yours." "Please move aside, Uncle Martin," Violet said quietly, clutching her market basket tighter. "I need to get home before dark." "Home?" Martin laughed, drawing the attention of several bystanders. "That shack ain't gonna be your home much longer, girl. Your pa's debts are common due, and I've found a way to settle them." A chill ran through Violet that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What are you talking about?" Martin leaned in, his whiskey breath hot against her face. "Found a fella up in Denver who runs a certain type of establishment. Says he's always looking for substantial girls like yourself. Some men prefer a woman with more to hold on to." Horrified understanding dawned on Violet. "You wouldn't dare." "Already sent word," Martin said with a cruel smile. "He's sendin' someone to collect you next week. Offered a fair price too, enough to clear your pa's debts and leave a little something for my trouble." Violet's face burned with humiliation as she realized several people had stopped to listen. "My father never owed you anything," she hissed, "and I am not yours to sell. You think anyone in this town's gonna stop me?" Martin gestured around at the onlookers, who quickly averted their eyes. "Look at yourself, girl. You're damaged goods anyway. Might as well be useful." "Everything all right here?" The deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. Violet turned to see a tall stranger standing a few paces away, his features shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore trail-worn clothes, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. Martin straightened, suddenly wary. "Mind your business, stranger. Just having a family discussion with my niece." The stranger took a step closer, and Violet could now see his face weathered by sun and wind, with keen blue eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his features, a quiet strength that made her heart skip. "Doesn't sound like much of a family discussion to me," he said, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. "The lady seems distressed." "The lady," Martin sneered, emphasizing the word, "is my responsibility. And who might you be to interfere? Name's Jackson Hayes." The stranger touched the brim of his hat. "Just rode into town looking for work," Martin snorted. "Well, Hayes, Granite ain't hiring drifters to mind other folks' business." "Is that so?" Jackson's gaze shifted to Violet, something softening in his expression as he took in her distress. "Madam, do you need assistance?" Before Violet could respond, Martin grabbed her arm roughly. "She's fine. Come along, Violet. I'm not going anywhere with you. Violet wrenched her arm free, wincing at the force required. And I'm not yours to sell. Sell. Jackson's eyes narrowed dangerously. You're selling this woman. Martin puffed up his chest. What of it? She's eating me out of house and home. Look at her fat as a prize so and twice as useless. The crowd that had gathered let out a collective gasp at Martin's cruelty. Violet felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough these past months. Jackson Hayes stepped between them, his movements deliberate and controlled. I reckon you ought to apologize to the lady, Martin laughed. For what? Stating facts. Nobody wants a woman like her except for one thing, and Hollister in Denver's willing to pay good money for it. In one fluid motion, Jackson had Martin by the collar, lifting him slightly off his feet. She's soft because life was hard, he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. And that doesn't make her worth any less. It makes her human. He released Martin, who stumbled backward, clutching at his throat. Now, I suggest you reconsider whatever arrangement you've made in Denver. This ain't your concern, Martin sputtered, his face red with anger and humiliation. I'm making it my concern. Jackson turned to Violet. Madam, would you allow me to escort you home? Violet hesitated, caught between her natural caution around strangers and her desperate need to escape Martin. The cowboy's eyes held no judgment, only a respectful concern that she hadn't seen directed her way in months. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, she said finally. I would appreciate that. As they walked away, leaving Martin fuming in the street, Violet felt the town's eyes on her back. But for the first time in a long while, the weight of those stares didn't crush her quite so completely. I don't normally accept help from strangers, she said as they reached the edge of town, the lights of granite receding behind them. I don't normally interfere in family matters, Jackson replied, but some things a man can't stand by and watch. He's not really family, Violet explained, picking her way carefully along the darkening path. My mother's stepbrother. He showed up after Papa died, claiming to be here to help. She gave a bitter laugh. His help consisted of drinking Papa's last bottle of whiskey and trying to claim our homestead. Jackson nodded. Some vultures don't wait for death before they start circling. They crested a small rise, and Violet's home came into view, a small, weathered cabin with a listing porch and a roof that needed mending. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the last connection to her parents and their dreams of a better life in the West. It's not much, she said defensively, seeing Jackson take in the state of the place. It's a home, he replied simply. That's more than many have. Violet studied him in the fading light. Why did you help me, Mr. Hayes? Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Let's just say I know what it's like when people judge you for things that don't matter. He tipped his hat. Good evening, Miss Jenkins, Violet Jenkins, Miss Jenkins. If you need any help with repairs on your place, I'll be looking for work in town tomorrow. As she watched him walk back toward Granite, Violet wondered what had brought Jackson Hayes to their small mining town, and whether his arrival might be the one stroke of good fortune in a year filled with nothing but loss. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn day that made the aspens shimmer like gold coins against the deep blue Colorado sky. Violet rose early, as was her habit, to tend to her small flock of chickens and the old milk cow that had somehow survived the harsh winter that took her father. Her mind kept returning to the events of the previous evening and the stranger who had stepped in to defend her. Jackson Hayes. There was something about him that seemed both dangerous and trustworthy, a contradiction she couldn't quite resolve. After finishing her chores, Violet faced a decision. She needed supplies from town, but the thought of facing Martin again made her stomach clench with anxiety. Still, She couldn't hide forever. Gathering her courage, she donned her second-best dress, the blue one that her mother had made her before the consumption took her 3 years ago. It was a bit tight now, but she refused to be ashamed of her body. Not today. The walk to town felt longer than usual, each step bringing her closer to potential confrontation. As she approached the general store, she noticed a small crowd gathered outside the sheriff's office. Curiosity overcame caution, and she edged closer to listen. "Stealing horses over in Summit County," Sheriff Burke was saying, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "So keep an eye out for strangers passing through." Violet's heart sank. Was Jackson Hayes a horse thief? Had she accepted help from an outlaw? What about that fella who rode in yesterday? Someone asked. The tall one who stepped in when Martin was harassing the Jenkins girl. Sheriff Burke shook his head. "Hayes? Nah, I know of him. Fought in the war, then worked cattle drives up from Texas. He's got a solid reputation, good with horses, better with a gun but not quick to use it." Wonders never cease. He actually came in this morning asking about legitimate work. Relief washed over Violet, followed by embarrassment at having doubted Jackson. She continued to the general store, keeping her head high despite the whispers that followed her. Mrs. Abernathy, the storekeeper's wife, barely acknowledged her as she gathered her meager purchases: flour, coffee, a bit of sugar, and some thread to mend her father's old shirts that she'd taken to wearing for chores. "Will that be all, Miss Jenkins?" Mrs. Abernathy asked coldly when Violet approached the counter. "Yes, thank you," Violet said, counting out her precious coins. "I heard about your arrangement," the woman said, her voice lowered but still carrying enough for others in the store to hear. "Your poor mother would be scandalized." Violet's hands trembled with anger. "There is no arrangement, Mrs. Abernathy. My uncle was speaking without authority." Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. "Well, there's talk all over town this morning. Martin's telling anyone who'll listen that he's found a solution to your situation." Her eyes deliberately raked over Violet's figure. "My situation is my own concern," Violet said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "and I'm not for sale." "Of course not, dear," Mrs. Abernathy said with false sympathy. "But do consider your options. A woman alone, especially one with your challenges, has limited prospects in a place like Granite." Violet gathered her purchases, fighting back tears of frustration. "Good day, Mrs. Abernathy." As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a broad chest. Looking up, she found herself staring into the now familiar blue eyes of Jackson Hayes. "Miss Jenkins," he said, touching his hat brim, "fancy meeting you here." Violet was acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. "Mr. Hayes, I heard you're looking for work in town." "That I am. Sheriff Burke mentioned the livery stable needs help, so I'm headed there next." He glanced at her packages. "Those look heavy. May I assist you?" Before she could answer, the store's door banged open and Martin stumbled in, his face flushed with drink despite the early hour. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Violet. "There you are," he growled. "Been looking all over. Got a telegram this morning Hollister's man will be here tomorrow, not next week. You need to get your things packed." The store went silent. Violet felt the blood drain from her face. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." "You don't have a choice, girl," Martin snarled. "Your pa owed me money and I found a way to collect. You should be grateful, at least you'll have a roof over your head." "As I recall," Jackson said mildly, "Miss Jenkins made her feelings on the matter quite clear last night." Martin's head snapped up, noticing Jackson for the first time. "You again. I warned you to mind your own business, Cowboy." "And I decided not to take your advice," Jackson replied, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard. Martin reached inside his jacket and Violet gasped as she saw the glint of a small pistol. "I won't be made a fool of by some drifter and a fat, He never finished the sentence. Jackson moved with startling speed, catching Martin's wrist and twisting until the gun clattered to the floor. In one smooth motion, he kicked it away and forced Martin's arm up behind his back, making the older man yelp in pain. "That's enough," came a new voice as Sheriff Burke stepped into the store, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" "This man assaulted me," Martin cried, his voice high with indignation. "After you pulled a gun," Mrs. Abernathy interjected unexpectedly. "We all saw it, Sheriff." Mr. Hayes was simply defending himself and Miss Jenkins. Sheriff Burke sighed heavily. "Martin, we've talked about carrying that pocket pistol when you're drinking." He nodded to Jackson. "You can release him, Hayes. I'll take it from here." Jackson let go and Martin rubbed his shoulder, glaring murderously. "This ain't over. Hollister's man is coming tomorrow and he won't leave empty-handed." "About that," the sheriff said, suddenly stern. "I got a wire from Denver this morning asking about a man named Martin Jenkins trying to sell a woman to a brothel. Seems Hollister may be many things, but he draws the line at forced servitude. When he realized what you were proposing, he contacted the authorities." Martin's face went white. "That's a lie. It was a legitimate business arrangement." "Selling a person is never legitimate," Sheriff Burke said flatly. "Now, I can't arrest you for something you haven't done yet, but I'm warning you, if this Hollister's man shows up looking to collect a woman against her will, you'll both be facing charges." Martin looked from the sheriff to Jackson to Violet, his eyes wild with thwarted rage. "This is your fault," he hissed at Violet. "Your pa always said you were more trouble than you were worth. Too stubborn, too smart-mouthed, and now too fat to even fetch a decent price." Violet flinched as if he'd struck her, the cruel words hitting deeper than she wanted to admit. "That's enough," Sheriff Burke said, taking Martin by the arm. "You're coming with me to sleep it off." As the sheriff led Martin away, Violet became aware of the stares from everyone in the store. Humiliation burned through her, and she grabbed her purchases, needing to escape. "Wait," Jackson said softly, reaching for the heaviest of her packages. "Let me help you." Outside in the bright sunlight, Violet finally let her tears fall. "Thank you," she managed, "but I don't need your charity, Mr. Hayes." "It's not charity to help a neighbor," Jackson replied, falling into step beside her. "And I meant what I said last night." "About what?" Violet asked, wiping her cheeks with her free hand. "About life being hard." Jackson's voice was gentle. "I can see it in your eyes. You've faced more than your share of sorrows. The way your body looks now, that's just a testament to your survival." His words took her breath away. No one had ever spoken to her with such understanding, such absence of judgment. For a moment, she couldn't respond. "My father always said I was too thin anyway," she finally said with a watery laugh. "Before he got sick, he used to tease that I'd blow away in a strong wind." Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his rugged face. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Violet said softly. "He would have liked you, I think." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the town falling away behind them as they took the path toward Violet's homestead. "Mr. Hayes," Violet began hesitantly. "Jackson, please. Jackson, why are you really in Granite?" "A man with your abilities could find work in larger towns, places with more opportunities." He was quiet for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I was riding with a cattle drive up from Dodge City. We delivered the herd to Denver last week." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "I've been drifting since the war ended, never staying in one place too long, but lately—" He trailed off, then shrugged. "Lately, I've been thinking it might be time to stop running." "Running from what?" Violet asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. I'm sorry, that's not my business. No, it's a fair question. Jackson's eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the mountains that ringed the valley. Memories, mostly. Things I did during the war that I'm not proud of. And after, when work was scarce and choices were limited. Violet nodded, understanding more than he might realize. Everyone in the West was running from something: poverty, scandal, grief, or worse. Her own parents had fled Ohio after her mother's family disowned her for marrying below her station. And Granite seemed like a good place to stop, she asked, gesturing at the modest cabin now visible ahead of them. Jackson's lips quirked in a half-smile. It didn't, actually. I was planning to pass through on my way to California. But then I saw a man bullying a woman in the street, and somehow I'm still here. Violet felt her cheeks warm. Well, I'm grateful for that, at least. As they reached her cabin, Violet suddenly realized the precariousness of her situation. Even with Martin temporarily dealt with, the reality remained she was a woman alone, with dwindling resources and a homestead she could barely maintain. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered impulsively as Jackson set her packages on the porch. "It's the least I can do to thank you." "I'd like that very much," he replied, his voice warm. Inside, Violet busied herself with the coffee pot, acutely aware of Jackson's presence as he looked around the small, neat cabin. His gaze lingered on the bookshelf, filled with her father's medical texts and her mother's favorite novels, then moved to the patchwork quilt draped over the rocking chair, her mother's last project before she fell ill. "Your parents built this place?" he asked, running a hand over the smoothly hewn pine table. "My father did, with help from some miners he'd treated," Violet explained, measuring coffee grounds carefully. "He was a doctor, though not formally trained. Mostly he learned from books and experience." "And you? Did you learn his healing ways?" Violet smiled sadly. "Some. I assisted him with patients when Mama was too ill to help. After she died, I became his right hand." The memory of those days, hard but purposeful, brought a pang of longing. The miners trusted him. "They still come to me sometimes with minor ailments, though I've nowhere near his knowledge." "Yet Martin claims your father left debts," Jackson observed, his tone careful. Violet sighed, setting the coffee to boil. "Papa never charged those who couldn't pay, and toward the end, when he was too sick to work, we lived on credit and kindness. After he died, Martin appeared with documentation claiming Papa had borrowed money from him years ago." She shook her head. "I've never seen any evidence of it, but without Papa to dispute it. And no one in town stood up for you. There were a few who tried to help. Mr. Holcomb at the bank gave me more time. Mrs. Wilson brings eggs when her hens are laying well, but most—" Violet shrugged. "Most believe Martin because it's easier than questioning him." Jackson's expression darkened. "And easier than helping a woman on her own." "Exactly." The coffee began to bubble, and Violet poured 2 cups, offering one to Jackson. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt through her. "Thank you," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Had he felt it too? They sat at the table, the autumn sunlight streaming through the window, casting golden rectangles on the plank floor. For the first time in months, Violet felt a sense of peace in her own home. "What will you do now?" Jackson asked after a while. "About Martin, I mean." Violet cradled her cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I don't know. The sheriff may have stopped him this time, but Martin won't give up easily. He wants this land, thinks there might be gold on it, though Papa always said there wasn't." "Is there?" A genuine laugh escaped her. "No, Papa had it assessed years ago. There's a small seam of low-grade silver that wouldn't pay for the equipment needed to extract it. But Martin's convinced himself there's a fortune just waiting to be dug up." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Men have done worse for less hope of riches. He glanced around the cabin again. This place needs work before winter comes. I know, Violet admitted. I've been doing what I can, but… She gestured at herself ruefully. I'm not built for heavy labor. Few are, regardless of size, Jackson replied matter-of-factly. That's why people help each other. He set down his cup. I could fix your roof tomorrow if you'd allow it, and that loose step on your porch. Violet frowned. I couldn't possibly pay you what your work is worth. I'm not asking for payment, Jackson said. Just maybe another cup of this excellent coffee. Why would you do that? Violet asked, genuinely puzzled. Jackson's expression grew serious. Because where I come from, neighbors help neighbors, and because… He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. Because I think you've had more than your share of people taking from you. It's time someone gave instead. Tears pricked Violet's eyes at the unexpected kindness. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jackson suggested with a gentle smile. And then perhaps you could tell me more about your father's medical books. I've always had an interest in healing. And so began a new chapter in Violet's life, one she could never have predicted. True to his word, Jackson returned the next day with tools borrowed from the livery stable, where he'd secured temporary work. He spent the day repairing her roof, replacing rotted boards on the porch, and reinforcing the chicken coop against predators. Violet insisted on feeding him lunch and dinner, finding an unexpected pleasure in cooking for someone who appreciated her efforts. Unlike Martin, who had complained about every meal she'd prepared during his unwelcome stays, Jackson ate with evident enjoyment, complimenting her venison stew and cornbread as if they were fine restaurant fare. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, accepting a second helping. "My mother," Violet replied, pleased by his appreciation. She grew up wealthy in Ohio, but she always said a lady should know how to manage her kitchen, even if she had servants. She was right, Jackson said, though I suspect she'd be proud of how you've managed far more than just the kitchen. The days stretched into weeks, with Jackson finding more permanent work at the livery stable while continuing to help Violet with repairs to her homestead. He'd taken a room above the stable, but spent most of his free time at her cabin, gradually becoming a fixture in her life. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Gossip spread about the strange friendship between the new cowboy and that Jenkins girl. Some of it was unkind suggestions that Jackson must be after her land, or worse, taking advantage of a desperate woman. But surprisingly, not all the talk was negative. "He's good with the horses," Mr. Peterson from the stage company remarked one day when Violet was in town. "Fixed that problematic mare of mine that no one else could handle. And he helped old Mrs. Gunderson when her wagon broke down," added the blacksmith's wife. "Wouldn't take a penny for it either." Slowly, Jackson was building a reputation in Granite not as a drifter passing through, but as a man of skill and integrity. And as he became more accepted, some of the town's coldness toward Violet began to thaw as well. Martin, meanwhile, had been noticeably absent. According to Sheriff Burke, he'd left town the day after the confrontation in the general store, supposedly heading to Denver on business. Violet couldn't help but worry about what that business might be, but she refused to let fear of Martin poison the unexpected happiness she'd found. One crisp October evening, as they sat on her newly repaired porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Jackson cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he said, his usual confidence strangely absent. "Winter's coming soon." Violet agreed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The aspens are already turning. Papa used to say when they're fully gold, the first snow is just weeks away." "Your father was a wise man," Jackson said. He fell silent again, seeming to struggle with his words. "Is something wrong?" Violet asked, suddenly worried. "Are you planning to move on before the pass is close?" Jackson looked startled. "Move on? No, that's not." He took a deep breath. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd consider taking on a boarder for the winter." Violet blinked in surprise. "A boarder? Me," Jackson clarified, a faint flush visible beneath his tan. "The stable loft is fine for now, but it won't be warm enough once the snows come. And you have that spare room that was your father's office." He hurried on before she could respond. "I'd pay proper rent, of course, and continue helping with maintenance. Chop wood, clear snow, that sort of thing." Violet's mind raced. Having Jackson living in her home would certainly cause talk, even with the propriety of a business arrangement. But the prospect of facing another Colorado winter alone was daunting. And if she were honest with herself, the idea of having Jackson nearby every day held an appeal that went beyond practical considerations. "People will talk," she said finally. Jackson's mouth quirked in that half-smile she'd grown so fond of. "People already talk. Question is, do we care?" "I've never been very good at not caring what others think," Violet admitted. "It's a small town. Reputations matter." "They do," Jackson agreed, "which is why I've spoken to Reverend Simmons about the arrangement. He agrees it's sensible, given the circumstances, and has offered to make it known that he approves provided we maintain proper decorum, of course." Violet couldn't help but laugh. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I try to," Jackson said, his expression growing serious again. "Violet, I don't want to make your life more difficult. If you'd prefer I find other arrangements—" "No," Violet interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. "No, I think your suggestion makes perfect sense. The room is just sitting empty, and winter is always harder alone." The smile that spread across Jackson's face made her heart flutter in a way that was becoming increasingly familiar. "Then it's settled. I'll speak to Reverend Simmons tomorrow to let him know." As autumn deepened, Jackson moved his few possessions into the small room that had once been her father's office. True to his word, he paid fair rent, contributed to the household chores, and maintained a respectful distance that would satisfy even the most proper of the town's matrons. But something was changing between them, a growing awareness that neither could quite put into words. Violet found herself taking extra care with her appearance each morning, pinching color into her cheeks before he came in for breakfast. And more than once, she caught Jackson watching her with an expression that made her stomach flip pleasantly. The first snow came in early November, a gentle dusting that transformed Granite and the surrounding mountains into a wonderland of white. Violet woke to find Jackson already outside, clearing paths to the chicken coop and woodpile, his breath clouding in the cold morning air. "It's beautiful," she said, stepping onto the porch with a cup of coffee for him. Jackson straightened, leaning on the shovel as he accepted the cup. "It is," he agreed, though his eyes weren't on the landscape but on her face. That evening, as they sat before the fireplace, Violet mending a shirt, Jackson cleaning his revolver, he suddenly set aside his work and turned to face her. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said, his expression unusually solemn. Violet's hand stilled, a thread of anxiety winding through her. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous," Jackson assured her. "Just important." He took a deep breath. "I haven't been entirely honest about why I stayed in Granite." "Oh." Violet set down her sewing, giving him her full attention. "I told you I was thinking about stopping my wandering, finding a place to settle. That was true." He hesitated, then continued. "What I didn't say was that I'd already decided Granite might be that place before I ever stepped in to help you that night." Violet frowned in confusion. "But you said you were just passing through." "I was," Jackson acknowledged. But earlier that day, I'd stopped at the land office looking at available properties. The clerk mentioned your father's homestead might be coming up for auction due to unpaid taxes. A cold feeling spread through Violet. So you were interested in my land. Is that why you've been helping me? No, Jackson looked genuinely distressed. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm making a mess of this. What I mean is, after I left the land office, I saw you walking through town. You were holding your head high despite the whispers following you, and there was something about your dignity, your determination. I couldn't look away. Violet's heart began to beat faster. What are you saying, Jackson? I'm saying that when I stepped in that night, it wasn't just because Martin was being cruel. It was because I'd been watching you all day, hoping for a reason to introduce myself. His blue eyes were earnest in the firelight. I stayed in Granite because of you, Violet. Not your land, not some scheme, but because I've never met anyone like you. Tears pricked at Violet's eyes, but not from sadness. Why tell me this now? Jackson reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. Because I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just neighborly concern. It's more, Violet. Much more. The world seemed to still around them, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind sighing around the eaves of the cabin. Violet looked down at their joined hands as large and weathered, hers soft and plump, and felt a certainty she hadn't known since before her parents died. I feel it too, she whispered, meeting his gaze. I have for weeks now. Relief and joy transformed Jackson's face. I was afraid. I know I'm not much of a catch. Ex-soldier, drifter, no real property to my name. Violet laughed softly. And I'm the overweight daughter of a country doctor with a falling-down cabin and a flock of temperamental chickens. We make quite a pair. We do, Jackson agreed, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that made her breath catch. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Their courtship progressed with the same quiet certainty that had marked their friendship. Jackson was unfailingly respectful, mindful of Violet's reputation in the small town. But there was no mistaking the love that grew between them, visible in the way his eyes followed her around the room, in how she leaned slightly toward him whenever they sat together, in the lingering touch of hands when passing the salt at dinner. December arrived, bringing heavier snows and the festive preparations for Christmas. Granite transformed itself with greenery and ribbons, the townsfolk's spirits lifted by the holiday despite the harsh weather. Violet found herself welcomed back into the community in a way she hadn't been since before her father's death. Whether it was Jackson's growing popularity or simply the Christmas spirit, she was grateful for the thawed relations. Mrs. Wilson invited her to join the church quilting circle, and even Mrs. Abernathy offered a genuine smile when Violet entered the general store. "You're looking well, dear," the shopkeeper's wife remarked. "There's color in your cheeks again. That Hayes fellow must be taking good care of you." "We take care of each other," Violet replied with dignity, but couldn't suppress a pleased smile. 2 days before Christmas, Violet was kneading dough for the special bread her mother had always made for the holiday when Jackson burst through the door, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Violet," he said without preamble, "Martin's back in town." Her hands stilled in the dough. "Are you sure?" Jackson nodded grimly. "Saw him at the saloon. He's drinking heavily and making threats saying he's going to reclaim what's rightfully his." Fear clutched at Violet's heart. "The homestead. And you," Jackson added, his expression darkening. Apparently his Denver scheme fell through completely when Hollister discovered what he was planning. Now he's telling anyone who'll listen that you've stolen his inheritance and corrupted me into helping you. "That's absurd," Violet said, anger displacing her fear. This was never his property, and as for corrupting you—" A blush heated her cheeks. "I told him as much," Jackson said, removing his hat and coat. "He didn't take it well." "What happened?" "Nothing yet," Jackson assured her. Sheriff Burke was there and warned him to keep the peace. But Martin's determined, and he's found some sympathetic ears among the miners who don't know the whole story. Violet sighed heavily, wiping flour from her hands. It was too much to hope he'd simply gone for good. "We'll face him together," Jackson promised, crossing to take her flour-dusted hands in his. "I won't let him harm you or take your home." Violet looked up at him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and become so essential to her happiness. "I know," she said softly. "But I'm afraid of what he might do. Martin's always been reckless, and now he's desperate as well." Jackson's expression softened. "Then perhaps it's time we discussed a more permanent arrangement, one that would strengthen our position against Martin's claims." Violet's heart skipped a beat. "What sort of arrangement?" Instead of answering immediately, Jackson reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. "I was planning to give you this on Christmas Day, but circumstances suggest now might be better." He unwrapped the handkerchief to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," Jackson explained, his voice husky with emotion. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep through the war and all my wandering years. I've been carrying it, waiting for the right woman to give it to." He took a deep breath. "Violet Jenkins, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Violet's eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jackson, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. Then, with infinite tenderness, he leaned down and kissed her their first kiss, tasting of flower and promises, and a future suddenly bright with possibility. They were married on Christmas Eve, with Reverend Simmons performing the ceremony in the small church, decorated with pine boughs and candles. The townsfolk turned out in surprising numbers, their initial skepticism about the match having given way to genuine good wishes after months of observing the couple's devoted care for each other. Martin, to everyone's relief, was conspicuously absent, having been firmly warned by Sheriff Burke to stay away from the ceremony and the couple. As snow fell softly outside, Violet and Jackson exchanged their vows. Violet wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully let out and adorned with new lace, while Jackson stood tall and proud in a new suit purchased for the occasion. "You look beautiful," he whispered as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife. "You don't mind?" Violet asked quietly, a last flicker of insecurity surfacing. "That I'm not slender like other women." Jackson's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "I meant what I said that first night, Violet. You're soft because life was hard. And that softness both in your body and your heart is what makes you perfect. Perfect for me." As they stepped out into the snowy evening, cheered by the townspeople who had once shunned Violet, she felt a sense of completeness she'd feared would never be hers again after losing her parents. In Jackson, she had found not just a husband but a true partner, someone who valued her for exactly who she was, curves and all. Martin made one final attempt to challenge their happiness a week after the wedding, arriving at the homestead drunk and belligerent, waving papers he claimed proved his right to the property. But he found himself facing not just Jackson this time, but Sheriff Burke and half a dozen townsmen who had come to respect the new couple. "Those papers are forgeries, Martin," the sheriff said firmly. "The land office confirms that Dr. Jenkins left everything to his daughter free and clear. And now that she's married to Hayes, you have even less claim." Defeated at last, Martin slunk away from Granite, never to return. Rumor had it he headed to California, still chasing elusive riches that always seemed just beyond his grasp. Spring came to the Colorado mountains, melting the snow and bringing new life to Violet and Jackson's homestead. With his skilled hands and her careful management, the place began to thrive as it hadn't since before her father's illness. They planted a larger garden, added to the chicken flock, and Jackson even brought home 2 young milk cows to start a small dairy operation. "We could sell butter and cheese in town," Violet suggested as they stood arm in arm, watching the cows graze in the greening pasture. "Maybe even open a proper dairy someday." "I like how you think, Mrs. Hayes," Jackson said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always looking forward." Violet leaned into his embrace, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach, their first child, due in the autumn. "It's easy to look forward when the future seems so bright." "It does, doesn't it?" Jackson's hand covered hers, protective and loving. "Though I have to say, the present is pretty wonderful too." As they walked back to their cabin, now sound and weathertight after Jackson's careful repairs, Violet reflected on how much had changed in a single year. From despair and isolation to love and community. From being judged for her appearance to being valued for her heart and mind. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Violet smiled up at him, her heart full. "I was just thinking that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations." "They certainly do," Jackson agreed, drawing her closer as they crossed the threshold of their home together. "They certainly do."